West Power Pool news conference that has got underway. Let's go ahead and listen into this.
We don't own the generators or the power lines, as Derek mentioned. Honestly, our primary responsibility is to make sure that electricity is delivered to the member utilities in the most affordable way possible. And then those utilities then deliver the power to their customers. During a storm like this one, our job is to make sure that the region's electric grid is managed reliably. The decision to reduce load, even just a single megawatt, is a decision that we never take lightly. Fortunately, our geographic diversity helps us to spread those types of necessary outages across a 14-state area so that no one area takes the brunt of the outage situation. And our local utilities then utilize their plans that they have in place for issuing rolling outages within their areas. So, we simply have to continuously balance power supply and demand. And we also have to keep the transmission infrastructure operating within the safe limits that it's designed for to prevent uncontrolled and cascading outages from occurring, which would be much, much more devastating than anything that we've seen this week. And so with that, those are my opening remarks. I appreciate you all being here. I'm going to pass it back to Derek, and I think we're going to get into a little bit more details about what's been happening and what we see happening going forward.
Thank you, Barbara. So I just want to take a moment to walk through the timeline of events that have occurred over the last several days, just to frame the rest of the conversation. So this has been an unprecedented event for the SPP region. We actually began planning for this according to our forecasts several days ago, and the first sort of publicly visible step that we took was the declaration of conservative operations on February the 9th. Conservative operations, that's just our way to signal to our generator and transmission operators that conditions are going to exist that could stress the system, and so we and they should begin to operate the system more conservatively. And there's a number of things that we can do along those lines. So the next step that we took was the issuance of our first energy emergency alert level 1, which we did on Sunday, February the 14th at 5 a.m. There are 3 levels of energy emergency alert that increase in severity. The first level just means that conditions exist that could lead to the exhaustion of our reserves. So we still have enough power. We're able to serve all load at that point. We have our full reserves, but we anticipate that we could have to dip into operating reserves. So again, that happened on Sunday, February the 14th at 5 a.m. And then just a little bit later that morning at 7:22 a.m. on Sunday, February the 14th, we issued an energy emergency alert level 2. And around that time, we also made our first public appeals. We worked through our member utilities and asked that they reach their end-use consumers and encourage people to begin conserving energy. I'll note, I mentioned that this was an unprecedented event. That marked the first time that SPP has ever had to declare public conservation, or that we have ever issued an energy emergency alert level 2. Then on Monday, February the 15th at 10:08 a.m., we issued, again, our very first energy emergency alert level 3. And that means that we are now operating under our minimum required reserves. At that point, we were still able to serve all load, but we were dipping into those reserves. And it was a short time later at 12:10 p.m. Central Time, at 10:08 a.m. that we first had to declare and work with our member utilities to call for controlled interruptions of service. So that was Monday, February 15th. We were able to restore all load 50 minutes later, though. And so we very shortly thereafter were able to get enough generation online to restore load. And by 2 p.m. that afternoon on February 15th, had backed down to an energy emergency alert level 2. The next step was earlier today. Was the declaration of an energy emergency alert level 3 at 6:46 a.m. And then we also had to curtail energy later today, but by 11:30 a.m. we had returned to an energy emergency alert level 2. And then as of 12:31 p.m. Central Time today, we returned to an energy emergency alert level 1. So currently the SPP system, and that's a 14-state region in the central U.S., we are able to serve all the load on our system. We have enough generation online, and we are able to meet our reserve requirements. So just a recap of the events that have led us here. And at this point, I'm going to turn to our Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, Lanny Nickel, who will go a little bit further into what we've been experiencing operationally and what we see on the horizon. Lanny?
Well, thank you very much, Derek, and appreciate you providing a step-by-step explanation of the various events and steps along the way that we have experienced so far. I want to go back just a little further and do a little bit more of an explanation as to how we got to where we're at. I know that many of our consumers across the region are curious and frustrated and wondering why there wasn't better preparation. And so I want to address that just a little bit. We began actually to prepare for this event over a week ago. We saw the potential for the winter storm. It was in a lot of forecasts. We knew this was coming, and we began to work to prepare for it as best we could over a week ago. We have worked closely with power suppliers and our utility operators within our region to make sure that generation is available to meet the forecasted peak consumption, which we knew and fully expected to occur yesterday and today. We knew that Monday and today of this week were going to be extremely high in terms of weather or winter peak consumption. And we began to make sure that generating units were online and available to produce energy, actually beginning as far back as Thursday of last week. Despite these efforts and despite these plans, the severe weather that we experienced, the limited fuel supply that we began to observe and experience began to hamper our ability to balance the supply that we had available to us with the demand from consumers being served by each of our utility members. We, as Derek mentioned, we issued escalating notices that advised of the tightening supply conditions and began to ask for voluntary reductions in energy use. We don't want, as Barbara mentioned earlier, we do not want to interrupt service. No one wants to do that. That's a last resort. We have over 17.5 million consumers within our region. We don't want a single one of them to go without power for a single minute. We held off as long as we possibly could to make the call to interrupt service in a controlled fashion. Real-time energy production changes on a second-by-second basis, just as the demand does. And once we observe an imbalance between supply and demand, we have to act within minutes to correct it by reducing demand. If we don't act quickly, the situation can get out of hand, and that can evolve into an uncontrolled situation that is longer lasting and possibly even of a greater magnitude. And that's absolutely what we don't want to have happen. So we have worked closely with our members. They have worked closely with us. We've worked with our neighbors. Our neighbors have worked closely with us. We've all been working together as best we can to prevent the actions that we ultimately ended up having to take. We wish that we could let people know well in advance that their service is about to be interrupted. But the reason we don't do that is because we wait as long as we possibly can to make that decision. We don't take that decision lightly. And we know that our utilities can interrupt power quickly. And they have operators with fingers on the buttons, ready to push those buttons and ready to interrupt consumers as necessary and only as absolutely necessary. So having said that, that's kind of the history. What do we project going forward? I do want to just touch briefly on the amount of interruptions that we asked for yesterday and directed. It was about 641 megawatts. To put that in perspective, that represents about 1.5% of our peak demand on that day. Today, we interrupted, or at least directed the interruption of about 2,700 megawatts of load within our region, and that represents about 6% of our peak demand. So clearly today was a little bit worse than yesterday. Our members are the ones that then, according to their plans, have to take action, and they know who to interrupt, and they know when to interrupt them and how to rotate that and spread it around in the best possible way that they can. Yesterday's interruption lasted about 50 minutes. Today's lasted a little over 3 hours. We were able to restore that and are now actually in pretty good shape, but we're not out of the woods. We expect that tonight load will pick up. We'll start to see more and more consumption as the evening grows, and it's possible that we could be back in this situation again later tonight. If we survive tonight without having to direct further curtailments and interruptions of service, we could be back in this tomorrow. There's a lot of factors at play, and every factor has to line up in order for us to be able to be successful in operating through the day successfully. Fuel supply is a concern of ours.
You're listening in here to Southwest Power Pool, talking about the local power supply and all of the recent outages, basically explaining why they had to go to what's called a level 3 alert, operating beneath their minimum requirements due to the extremely low temperatures we're experiencing and the inadequate supply of natural gas that they have on hand, hoping against hope that that is not going to be necessary as we move forward into tomorrow, something we are staying on top of here, of course, on KCTV5, waiting for word too from Evergy as well onto their latest efforts to also conserve power supply here in the area. The Kansas